What makes you you? What affects how you act, believe, exist? Do these experiences change you, or do they guide you to where you want to be? These are rhetorical questions, designed for you to stop and reflect. While you're thinking about these questions, can you ask yourself how trauma might apply to these questions? Trauma is a tricky thing, as it could be an incredibly crucial part to your life that you're unaware of. It may be part of your quote-unquote normal that's just there and you wouldn't know. Trauma can be seen in many forms, whether it's through the loss of a loved one, through the ideas of a natural disaster, or just a generally distressing event. Although we don't know exactly where, although we don't know how trauma affects us, or even though it's different for everybody, it could play a major effect in your life. So what is trauma? How can it affect you? Let's start from the beginning. Childhood. A place where the only important thing is that you're fastest on the playground, or that you're not eating the Play-Doh that you're making your sculpture out of, or that your project is the prettiest that it can be. What often evades us about this time, though, as according to the US Department of Federal Affairs, kids under the age of 12, 15 to 43% of them go through at least one trauma. And of that percentage of teens and kids, 1 to 6% of boys and 3 to 15% of girls also develop PTSD. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, refers to traumatic events that can cause immense stress after being triggered. Trauma, while very similar, is a lasting emotion due to a distressing event. This study shows how frequent trauma is and how bad the consequences may be. Childhood, for many, is a place where our minds slip to feel safe. It's a place where our mind can slip to where all your harshest realities are able to dissipate. But what we don't know about this time is frequently we use the idea of romanticization to block out the bad memories. Although in this time, the feeling of trauma may feel minuscule in comparison to now, the ideas of then make seem less intense, so it's easier to slip back to that place. The New York Times contends that although hidden memory may not be truly effective, the idea of the fading bias effect may be. The fading bias effect says that more positive emotions that are tied to memories cause them to last longer than those compared to negative emotions. When you think about it, do you remember your best birthday over your worst? It would make sense, right? Although this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it can help you block out negative things that have happened in your past that cause you to kind of lose that sense of reality in them. When you look at this iceberg, sometimes when you look at your childhood, you can only see the top, whereas everything below might not feel like it's there. And that could pertain to your deepest of traumas and abilities. So why is it important? Trauma itself can embody itself in different places. A very impactful place is the prefrontal cortex. This is a vital part of the frontal lobe that regulates emotions, personality, and vital decision-making. According to the National Library of Medicine, this part of the brain is developing until the age of 25. So if something like trauma or PTSD gets in the way of an already fragile process, then who knows what effects it can have that are incredibly negative. For those who remember, or at least I remember, there was a movie that came out when we were kids called Inside Out. This movie followed the main character, Riley, in her adolescence as she's going through life, coming of age, experiencing things. And while she's experiencing things, how we see that is through the ideas of these 5 main emotions inside of her head. These being sadness, joy, disgust, fear, and anger. Now, when she feels an incredibly big emotion, she ties that emotion to a memory. For example, when you are in 4th grade and you just won the spelling bee in your Jets jersey because you spelled the word gymnastics correctly. Definitely not a personal experience. You embody that emotion in a yellow orb, which represents happiness. Although this is a fictional tale, it could be representative of how we hold our emotions. Emotional intelligence. What is it? Well, it's exactly as it sounds. It's the ability to understand emotions and be able to interpret those of others. So why is it important? Where does it come from? Well, emotional intelligence, although it's not understood exactly where it comes from, there's one thing that we do know. According to psychologists Tuck and Padmasabhil, the idea of trauma can inflict more emotional intelligence on someone. So that intertwining between these two things can be pretty impactful, as something like maturity, which is something that we all respect and want in ourselves, could embody itself because of something like trauma, as emotional intelligence and maturity are almost intertwined. So, why can I talk about trauma? What do I know about it? In modern days, we think of the word trauma as a synonym for something like pain or an inconvenience. How do I know how to decipher between an inconvenience and pain? Well, in the end of my sophomore year of high school, I truly learned the difference between what inconvenience was and what trauma is. In my sophomore year of high school, I experienced several instances of sexual, physical, and verbal assault on the basis of my sexuality and my race. These instances occurred in very public spaces at my old public high school, including the junior prom and several football games, where I was subject to such horrible things as kids, teachers, parents, the principal watched and did nothing. This is a level of stress and trauma I would never, ever wish on anybody else. The mental turmoil I felt in my last month of school, having to hide away because I was worried that I would throw up every second that I saw one of my abusers, that hyper-awareness that I gained is so incredibly impactful that it was horrible. This is trauma. So, what does that give you? Emotional intelligence and trauma are intertwined, and I am a living embodiment of it. My aforementioned hyper-awareness is an example of it. I was keen on staying active and aware of myself at all times, so I couldn't be put in a position where I would be hurt again. According to pediatrician Dan Brennan, the idea of hypervigilance, although it may not be a diagnosis, it can stem from mental conditions. This shows, both in me and through his research, that the idea of trauma and maturity and emotional intelligence are intertwined. Another important concept with emotional intelligence is the idea of empathy. It's the ability to understand one's emotions and make a deeper connection. Empathy allows one, if you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, it allows you to create these deeper connections and understand more about one another. This sense of maturity that one gains is pretty incredibly impactful. But it could also go the other way when someone's affected by trauma. It's a sliding scale. Some case studies have also found that if someone goes through a trauma in adolescence, they're subject to losing a sense of empathy. This shows how even if you put one incredibly mature person in a room next to somebody who seemed like they might be a wreck, they could have gone through something similar, except the way that their brain processed it is completely different. So, why is this important? Why do all of you in this audience need to know about this? Well, I want every person in this room to be aware of the fact that the person that is so mature and you look up to them because they embody what you want to be, they might need a shoulder to cry on too. Sometimes that person is the one in need of most help, but the way that they're able to express themselves is by helping others. They're unable to ask for help. So check on them. Check on yourself. Everybody deserves a shoulder to cry on. Everybody deserves to be who they are. So, I want everybody in this room to be able to learn, help yourself, reflect, including for yourself. Because at the end of the day, if we're not there for ourselves, we can't be there for each other. If you are struggling, I highly suggest that you reach out to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. This is a place where you can talk to. It's safe. You can find resources there. Or if you don't feel safe going to a random place on the internet, that's fine. Go to a parent, teacher, trusted friend. Ask for help. And maybe ask them if they need help too, because it's very possible that they do. This isn't just pertaining to kids either. Adults, if you feel like you're struggling, please do find help, because if you're not there for yourself, you can't be there for others. I know the only way I could get through everything that I went through is because of these beautiful people on the screen. I know that with these people in my lives, I have someone in my corner. There's no way to cure trauma. There's no way to make sure that your life goes on a path where you can prevent trauma from occurring to one person that you love or to yourself. So, if we find these support systems, if we find these people that love us and are willing to help each other, then I believe if we create more positive instances like this, then we will be able to develop more positive instances of actual maturity that's not trauma-based, and more instances of emotional intelligence. Make sure that you love everybody, because that's so incredibly important. Thank you.